Hello everyone, we hope you're all doing well. Welcome to one more video presented to you by Insights IAS team as part of InstaEthics, a GS4 initiative. Now in this video, we will be looking into one more very important moral theory called as utilitarianism. Alright, this theory on which there have been direct questions asked in your UPSC. And whenever you're generating what are the various possible course of actions available to you, you can use this utilitarianism theory as well. Right? Let me start my discussion by talking about a movie, because this will help me to tell you the core crux or the essence of this moral theory. Now in the last we spoke about Kantian ethics. I want you to remember that. Don't forget that, because I will be going back to that again and again in this video. If you have not read or watched that video, please go ahead and look at it once. Now in this imitation game, you have Benedict Cumberbatch portraying the role of a person called as Alan Turing. And this Alan Turing, right, he is referred to as the father of modern computers. He lived during the times of Second World War. And during the times of the Second World War, the Germans had a very beautiful device called as enigma. What did this enigma do? Enigma provided greater amount of encryption by using sophisticated algorithms of that particular times. It was very difficult for the enemies of Germany to decrypt it. Alright? And initially, when you look at World War II, Hitler was winning all across Europe, right? Countries such as Great Britain were suffering huge amount of losses. So one team was selected. It was headed by Alan Turing, and he was given the responsibility of breaking this enigma, trying to decrypt it. And they eventually managed to do so. Now, when they managed to decrypt the information which was generated, the encryption which was generated due to enigma, they did not act on all the information. What did they do? They acted on just a few important ones. Why did they do that? Why did they not act on all information and prevent the loss of property and human lives? The reason is quite simple and also quite unfortunate. If they had acted on all, this enigma, Germans would realize, has been decrypted, and they would change the process, and the war would have continued for a longer period of time, and pain would be witnessed by many millions of people in the world. So when they acted on a select few, right, they would ensure that the information that they have will reduce the time period of the war to the greatest extent possible, so that the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people after the war could be ensured. Because if war continued for a longer time, this greatest happiness of the greatest number cannot be ensured. No? So that is one thing. So here they applied the principle of utilitarianism. Right? Their end result was very simple. The consequence of their action was very simple. They wanted to reduce the war period so that there is greatest happiness of the greatest number of people at the end. Now, if you apply Kantism, Kantian ethics, to judge what Alan Turing and his team did, Kant is very severe on them. He might say that they are wrong because they passively allowed murders of so many millions, thousands of people to happen. Right? Their end was noble, to reduce the war period, but the means that they adopted was wrong. That is Kantian view. Utilitarianism, on the other hand, they don't focus on the means, they focus on the consequences of an action. And here the consequences of Alan Turing led to the reduction of war period, which led to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. So based on utilitarianism perspective, his action was right. Right? That is the reason why we call utilitarianism as a consequentialist theory. Utilitarianism is also referred as teleological theory as well. Okay, I hope you've understood the core crux of what utilitarianism theory is. Let me talk about some other important aspects related to it. Let me start with the history of utilitarianism. David Hume, in the early part of the 18th century, Jeremy Bentham and J.S. Mill, all of them are important utilitarian philosophers. Even during the ancient Greek philosophy period, you had a Greek philosopher called as Epicurus, who has spoken about utilitarianism in a significant manner. But whenever we talk about utilitarianism in the present scenario, we focus on Jeremy Bentham and J.S. Mill to a larger extent. What has Jeremy Bentham said about utilitarianism, the important aspect of it? Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, that is, pain and pleasure. Here, just to criticize Mr. Bentham, it's not just mankind, even animals, right, are moved by pain and pleasure. No animal would want to take a step which would create pain to it, is it not? Anyways, moving on, nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do. Remember, we had spoken about meta-ethics, descriptive, normative ethics, what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. Right? So when we talk about this, what he's saying is this utilitarianism, right? Here you have this word utility. The utility of any action should be based on the pleasure that it creates for us and to what extent it minimizes the pain. That should be the sole criteria to judge the action or consequence of a moral agent. That is what the statement is trying to say. Any action which maximizes pleasure for you and minimizes pain to the greatest extent possible, that action, as per Jeremy Bentham, is good or right. Some more important principles related to this theory, just have a look at that. It is an ethical rule of conduct that applies to individual, moral agents, institutions, and governments. Now, this is a very simple point, is it not? So, why are we discussing about this? Remember, Kantian theory is also something which is applicable to everyone. These are great points. They're not simple points, and the reason being very simple. These people, they lived in 18th century where discrimination was quite high. Okay? The society was divided in terms of class, in terms of feudals, lower sections in the society, kings and whatnot, aristocratic classes. Coming up in such society and saying that there is a law, there is a theory of mind which is applicable to individual moral agents, institutions and governments. For us, it seems very simple, but at that particular point in time, it is very radical, right? That's why I've included this principle. The other thing is pleasure of happiness is the only thing that truly has an intrinsic value. What is this intrinsic value? All of us, all right, want to become UPSC officers. All of you that you're watching, right? IAS, IPS officers. Why do you want to become IAS, IPS officers? Because you want to serve, right? And by serving, what is it that you're realizing for yourself at the end of the day? You're realizing happiness or pleasure. Okay? Pleasure or happiness has an intrinsic value. It's an end in itself. Being an IAS, IPS officer is a means. Okay? It has an extrinsic value, but not an intrinsic one. Our life, the intrinsic value of our life is to always realize that pleasure or happiness in our own self. Actions are right insofar as they promote happiness, wrong insofar as they produce unhappiness. We've spoken about this. Everyone's happiness counts equally. This is also one more radical concept. The greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. My definition of happiness is different. Your definition of happiness is different. I might be very happy with a Nokia 1100. You might be happy with a Apple iPhone 14 or whatever the latest edition is, right? So are all these things considered to be happy No, absolutely not. These are lower level of pleasures that utilitarians believe in, and we should not take that into consideration when we are applying utilitarianism. We need to think about higher end pleasures. Pleasure or happiness in the sense to lead a very safe life, to lead a life where the ideas that you have can be brought into picture, where you have opportunities available for you. These are higher end pleasures or happiness. That is what makes us happy, is it not? And that is where utilitarianism comes into the picture. And be it Ambani or be it a common man, you all want equal opportunities, right? That is something. You all want some sort of reservation or affirmative actions if you have faced any historical discrimination or you're facing that. Nothing wrong with that. Okay? So when we are talking about utilitarianism, apply that to the higher end pleasures or happiness. And in that higher end pleasures or happiness, no matter whether you're an Ambani or a common man, all of our happiness are treated equally. My happiness is not important more than yours. This is also very radical and an important concept. Please remember that. Moving on, right? Here I want to draw your attention to two more things. One is called as act utilitarianism, right? And the other one is rule utilitarianism. What is this act utilitarianism? This is associated with Bentham, and rule is associated with J.S. Smith. As per act utilitarianism, they believe that whenever we are deciding what to do, we should perform the action that will create the greatest net utility. In their view, the principle of utility, do whatever will produce the best overall result, should be applied on a case-by-case basis. What example can I give for this act utilitarian? How do you need to act? You need to act in such a way where you're creating greatest amount of net utility. Utility is what in this scenario? Creating pleasure. Now, during the times of pandemic, we went for lockdowns, we went for mandatory mask as well. Many people criticize this because this was against their choice and all those things. But at the end of the day, the greatest net utility is that we will be ensuring the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people, because wearing mandatory mask, when the government went for that, we had scientific studies to point out that it will reduce the vulnerability of the population, okay, to the vulnerability of getting that disease, that pandemic, right? Rule utilitarianism, they adopt two approaches, and this approach of judging a moral action, it depends on case-to-case basis, okay, right? The other thing is rule utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism adopt a two-part process view that stresses the importance of moral rules. According to rule utilitarianism, a specific action is morally justified if it conforms to a justified moral rule. What is this moral rule? Creating the greatest net utility. So far, it is similar as act utilitarianism. The second part is where it diverges to a certain extent. What is the second part? A moral rule is justified if its inclusion into our moral code would create more utility than other possible rules or no rule at all. Taking the example of pandemic, if there was no mask, then there would be greater amount of pain. The probability is there. So bringing a rule, okay, in that scenario, from the larger perspective, is good, is justified, is it not? So here there is one more level of degree. One more level of degree of protection. I can give one more example. Okay, let us think of this scenario where you have to murder one person to save 1,000 people. So this is good, right? This is utility. You're saving 1,000 people by just murdering one person. You have to act in such a way. That is what act utilitarianism says. But any moral theory which justifies murder, to whatever extent, it is wrong, right? So when you apply this rule utilitarianism, murdering one person, can it be something that we can accept or include it in our moral code? No, right? Murder is something, can we accept murder in our moral code? No. That is what rule utilitarianism speaks about. There is two levels of judging an action. Which one is better? Obviously, the rule one. Moving on. The key difference between act and rule utilitarianism is that act utilitarianism applies the utilitarian principle directly to the evaluation of individual actions, right? act only for individual actions, while the rule utilitarianism apply utilitarian principle directly to the evaluation of rules and then evaluate individual actions by seeing if they obey or disobey those rules whose acceptance will produce the most utility at a larger level. Okay, that's the thing. Utilitarianism. I can use another example, a kid who is stealing to feed 50 people. So as per act utilitarianism, that is right. Greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. But rule utilitarianism, if you accept stealing in that scenario, then that is wrong. Because everyone would start stealing and then the order in the society will be affected. There will be a lot of chaos. Remember, this act and rule utilitarianism. These are two terms which they might ask in your section A answers. Okay, you can apply this utilitarianism to multiple perspectives in political, social, economic fields. Where can you apply it in economic field? You can apply this to justify market economics. The greatest number of people will be justified when you have market dynamics of demand and supply. From the social sphere, where can I apply it? Right? The way we have grown up in Indian society, be it from any religion, in family, we emphasize on what? We emphasize on collective living. That is where we place our pleasure or happiness on. This is also a form of utilitarianism. Okay? So you have economic, you have social. From a political perspective, where can I apply utilitarianism? Right? Here you can look at certain constitutional principles that we have got. Okay? Or the constitution as a whole, where we are bringing certain rules and regulations because that would ensure the greatest happiness of the greatest number. But it is not all utilitarianism. It also has certain Kantian views and perspectives. We'll talk about that later. Okay? Following certain fundamental rights, making sure that DPSPs are followed in legislation making will ensure the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. And those who are left out, for them, we have various social justice provisions, right? We have affirmative actions provided to them, right? All these things are there. So from a political field, from a social field, from a economic field, I've given you quite many examples. Going for privatization of public sector enterprises, you can judge that from utilitarian perspective as well. Does it create the greatest benefit for the people? People who are usually paying income taxes, they often complain that at the end of the day, it is their money that runs the nation and whatnot, and all these criticisms you have heard about. But at the end of the day, when you're increasing taxes for them, yes, they might feel that individual pinch, but that money could be used for not just their growth, but for the wider growth of the country, which will be in their own good interest at a future time. Greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. Please apply these theories with what you are reading on a regular basis or what you have already read as part of your UPSC syllabus, right? What are some terms related to utilitarianism or how utilitarianism is compared with other theories? Some people compare utilitarianism with egoism and altruism, right? Because in egoism, you will be focusing on pleasure of oneself, right? In altruism, what you are doing, you are focusing on the pleasures of others compared to yourself, right? Even though there are some similarities of egoism, altruism with utilitarianism, they are not entirely related in whatever way possible, right? Because in utilitarianism, each and everyone's happiness is equal. In egoism, your happiness will be of a higher level, right? And in altruism, others' interests are being placed above your own. But in utilitarianism, nothing like that. All are equal. Your happiness, their happiness, everyone's happiness are equal. So there is a definite difference between utilitarianism, egoism, and altruism. Please remember that. There might be a section A question on differentiating these three terms. All right. Now, what are the general criticism of utilitarianism? Life always cannot be measured solely in terms of pleasure and pain. You remember I told you, nature has placed mankind to accept two objectives, either pleasure or pain. Our life is not just a sum of pleasure and pain, right? It is more than that. Sometimes we have to realize pain to see happiness as well. So when you're trying to measure our life only by pleasure and pain, you're commodifying it. And that's not the right way to judge a person's action. And you also know that in utilitarianism, you might adopt means which might not be completely ethical in nature, right? The other thing is happiness cannot be objectively quantified. I told you, right? Even though you're treating each and everyone's happiness as equal, my definition of higher sense of pleasure or happiness might be different from your sense of pleasure and happiness. How will you measure or judge happiness? It can't be done. That's one more criticism, important criticism of utilitarianism. The other thing is unattainable results, right? Here in utilitarianism, you're placing the emphasis on the consequence, on the result, end result. But that end result you might realize after some delay. And you have to take decision much earlier than that. How is it possible? You have all these genetically modified technologies that we have in our world. We are coming up with so many GM crops. People are saying that this is very important. It will help so many millions and billions of people all across the world. But we don't know whether it will help us in the longer term, right? This is what unattainable results mean. Sometimes what happens now, people use this utilitarianism theory to justify some actions of theirs, some policies of theirs. That's not right. Okay? Why it is not right? Because of this reason, unattainable. You can't measure something as crucial as genetically modified technology in the shorter term. The other thing is ignores justice at certain times. Imagine there is a development project which is being conducted in a tribal area where you have to construct a dam or a national park or a wildlife sanctuary, and you have to move the tribals in our country, in those regions, right? The tribals will be less in numbers, but if you build a dam, it will have a wider implication for millions of people. So by going by that, you will go with utilitarianism. But at the end of the day, it is the justice of the people justice of those people which are violated. Is it not? That social justice angle is not there enough in utilitarianism. Even the rights of one person, even if it is one person, they are very important. They are sacrosanct. And that is where our constitution finds a very beautiful balance between all the theories. It has utilitarianism, it has Kant, it has Gandhian, it has Marxism. You've read about it, liberal intellectual principles. Why has our constitution survived compared to all other constitutions that we have in the region? Nepal, you know how it is. Pakistan, you know how it is. Sri Lanka, you know how it is. Myanmar, you know how it is. It's because of this reason. We have not ransacked. There is a criticism that we have ransacked the constitution. It's just a copy of other constitutions. It's not that. We've borrowed the best of all other constitutions. We have borrowed the best of all the major theories that are present, that were present at that point in time, right? That's the beauty of our constitution. Moving on, it might promote selfish interest. This is what I was saying. People might use that this dam will create so much of jobs. It will impact positively so many people by giving them clean drinking water. They might have a selfish interest behind that. It might be related to the business that they might get, right? So all those things can happen when they use utilitarian principle to justify it, right? These are some important criticism of this theory from the perspective of exam. Like I've always told you, whatever you read in ethics, make sure that you apply to what is happening around the world. Sometimes people use war as a justification at the end of the day. Greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. Russia-Ukraine war. Russians might use this utilitarianism principle at the end of the day to say that By doing so, the collective security of Russia will be maintained for the longer future. Ukrainians might also use this, say that participating in the war will ensure that the Ukrainian interests are ensured, right? So theories, they don't work in all instances. There are criticism of utilitarianism, there are criticism of Kantism. Based on that particular circumstance, you should be able to quickly evaluate and then choose a proper course of action. This is where you will be put in your section B, case studies. We will start discussing case studies from the next videos. Okay, I'll discuss what are the various types of case studies they ask and how you need to make notes for them. And I'll be taking few examples as well. Thank you for your time. Hope this was useful. Take care.